So
here I am.
Good. I will mute myself and let everybody in.
Okay. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. Hello, good to see so many wonderful friends. Florida, Rochester, New York City, maybe Connecticut. Hi, Sharon Dolan. All right. We're going to pull up the prayer over Torah study. So, Michaela, do you have that? Or is that convenient? If not, then we can, there are people here who can just recite it. Oh, good morning, Eden. So good to see you. Nechemia. Shalom u'bracha. Good to see you. All right, I think we're just going to call on somebody to recite the blessing over Torah study. So who would like to usher us into the sacred space? Alana. Alana. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Bruchat at ya Eloheinu Mekor HaChayim Asher Kidshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah.
Amen. Amen. Ready to soak into sacred text. So today is Shabbat Chazon. It's still Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision, named for the prophetic reading for today, which is from Isaiah, and the reading starts with Isaiah's vision. But Shabbat Chazon always precedes the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, which starts tonight. And it is a day of grief for the calamities, many of the calamities that befell the Jewish people, especially the destruction of the first and second temple, but many, many others. Although the Holocaust has its own day, Yom HaShoah, so we don't throw that into the big calamity basket. And it's also a day of grief for our collective sins. So that's kind of hard to reckon with and grapple with. So today I want to look at some of the themes of the day. And even though they are sort of sad themes, we are studying Torah and it's Shabbat. So that is always, studying Torah is always full of pleasure. So I felt like it was appropriate for Shabbat because we're not really supposed to grieve on Shabbat. So with that, I will screen share. Okay. Let's see. Do you have the link? You don't have the link, right? Let's see if I can get you the link. Ah, there you go. I did it twice for good measure. Okay. So let me share my screen. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. How does that look? Yes, it looks okay. Excellent. So Shabbat Chazon from Ayaka to Echa. So Ayaka, as we will see in a minute, is what God asked Adam and Eve when they were hiding in the garden. And Echa is the beginning of the book of Lamentations. Ayaka means, where are you? And Echa, to translate loosely, is how could you? Right? So from where are you to how could you? Okay, so we'll kind of dive into that. So I'm giving you a few, we're going to look at a few Torah selections and then jump into some rabbinic texts. Okay, so first we're going to look at the context for where are you, which is Genesis 3. And what's happening in the narrative is that Adam and Eve have eaten from the forbidden tree of knowledge, and they are hiding from God, as if you could hide from God, right? So who would like to read the Hebrew and who would like to read the English? If you could raise your hand in the chat, because I can't really see people. And I'm going to ask whoever is moderating at this moment, I'm not sure if it's Michaela or Michaeli, to call on people. So raise your hand in the, yeah. Okay, Nehemiah. Beautiful. You would like to read the Hebrew, Nehemiah? Okay, Tov. There you are, you're ready.
Mm-hmm. Start from Hebrew?
You're going to read the Hebrew. I'm going to ask someone else to read the English.
Yeah. So I start first or the English starts first?
Well, we have you, so we'll start with the Hebrew, since I don't have an English reader yet. Meanwhile, raise your hand in the chat if you want to read the English. Okay, and we'll let our moderator figure out who that is. Go ahead, Nehemiah. Or actually, oh, all right. So then Roberta will read the English. Beautiful, Roberta, yay. Nehemiah, why don't you read just the first verse in Hebrew, and we'll have Roberta read the first verse in English.
Okay. First of all, I apologize to Asher Chaim. I won't do such good job on Sephardic accent as he does. No way. With all my time. וישמעו את קול אדוני אלוהים מתהלך בגן לרוח היום, ויתחבא האדם ואשתו מפני אדוני אלוהים בתוך עץ הגן.
Okay, Nehemiah, that was a beautiful reading. Okay, you don't have to compare yourself to anybody. That was beautiful. Thank you. Okay, Roberta.
They heard the eternal voice moving about in the garden at the breezy time of day, and the man and the woman hid from the eternal, from what is eternally present among the trees of the garden.
Roberta, beautiful, beautiful translation. And it's going to take us a long time if you translate as you go. So if you could just read it through, that would be great. So I want to make a few comments about this verse. So they heard the sound of God, right, moving about in the garden, mithalech bagan. And that's a very interesting word because it's as if the voice of God is walking through the garden and it's reflexive. So what's going on there? And we'll see a little bit later a midrash, if we get there, based on that reflexive movement of God in the Garden of Eden. Right? And then the Adam, the human being, right? It doesn't say man here, which is interesting. And the human being's wife hid, right? Hid. So, how do you, again, that question, like, how do you hide from God, and what does that mean? Okay, Nehemiah, verse 9.
ויקרא אדוני אלוהים אל האדם, ויאמר לו, אייכה.
Powerful. Okay, Roberta.
The source of being called out to the earthling and said, where are you?
Ah, beautiful. Love that. Thank you, Roberta. Amazing. So the eternal question here is, what does it mean when God says, where are you? And I think it was Soloveitchik, the 20th century philosopher, who interpreted it as sort of the existential cry to every human being in every generation. Where are you? Where are you? Right? Like when you feel like someone's not really like present or dealing with what they did, or not accountable. Like, where are you? Like, where are you? So I think it's a powerful, powerful question. Okay, Nehemiah.
ויאמר, את קולך שמעתי בגן, וירא, כי עירום אנוכי, ואחווה.
Roberta.
Earthling replied, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was vulnerable. So I hid.
Okay, so there's some, right. Yeah, fear.
Nehemiah's laughing because it gives me a little more courage to like try out my Hebrew. So toda rabah.
I love your interpretive readings, that's all.
I love this midrashic process. It's fabulous. Okay, Nehemiah.
ויאמר, מי הגיד לך כי ערום אתה, המן העץ אשר ציוויתיך לבלתי אכול ממנו, אכלת?
And eternal voice asked, who told you you were vulnerable? Did you eat from that tree from which you are forbidden?
Good. So who told you that you were naked? How did you know? Right? So, so that implies that the knowledge that the tree of knowledge gave them was self-consciousness, right? A knowledge of their own status and state of being in the world. And, there's some people who interpret the Garden of Eden as a tale of, human beings growing up. And, little kids, they don't know that they're naked until they know that they're naked. At a certain age, they know that they're naked and suddenly they're embarrassed, right? That embarrassment comes later. Okay, final verse, final interpretive dialogue here. Go ahead. Nehemiah.
ויאמר האדם, האישה אשר נתת עמדי, interesting, it's he or who? הוא נתנה לי מן העץ.
He נתנה לי.
Okay, it's a text, sorry about it, I blend the text. היא נתנה לי מן העץ ואוכל.
Earthling said, oh, this is beyond my interpretive capacity.
No, go with it because it's straight blame. Don't make this flowery. Just go with it. It's what it is. It's in the gutter here.
Earthling said that the feminine of me that you put at my side, she gave me that and I ate it.
Okay, and in terms of a plainer sense, a shot sense, the Adam is doing something amazing here. Adam is doing something amazing here because he's blaming two characters in one fell swoop. The woman you gave me to eat. The woman you gave me. So blaming God and blaming the woman. It's brilliant. How do you blame two people or two characters in one sentence, right? Unbelievable. Okay. Good job, Nehemiah and Roberta. I love that, again, that interpretive play. Okay, we're going to go on a little bit before we open up a question, at least one more text. So we're going to go from Ayeka, where are you, to Echa, which we read on Tisha B'Av. And here, tradition says that Jeremiah wrote this text, but whoever wrote it is lamenting after the destruction of this temple. Okay. You want to? Okay. All right, good. So I'm going to call on two more readers, a Hebrew and an English. Or maybe just a Hebrew. I'll do the English this time. A Hebrew reader, raise your hand. Asher Chaim, do you want to read? So I don't see any hands. Asher Chaim. Yes? Okay, I'm going to ask you to hear. Go
I
ahead.
think someone was raising a physical hand.
Oh, yeah? Who's that?
Hannah?
Chana? Is there a Chana that wants to read?
Her virtual hand is up now.
Sure. I'll
Great.
read.
Hi, Chana.
Hi. Echa Yashva Badan Ha'ir Rabati Am Hayta Almana Rabati Bagoyim Sarati Bamitinot Hayatam Lamas.
Beautiful.
Bacho. You want me-
Hold on 1 second. Let's just go
Okay.
verse by verse. So
Okay.
alas, or echa, or how, it's either sort of a sound for grief, or it's like, or how lonely sits the city. Once great with people, she that was great among the nations is become like a widow. The princess among states is become a thrall. I don't know exactly what thrall means, but the princess has been diminished or degraded. So what Lamentations does, and in some places very cruelly, is imagine Zion as a woman, right? And the woman is suffering. The woman has been abused. The woman here is like a widow, or a princess has been dethroned. Okay, go on, Hannah.
Bacho Tivche Balayla V'dimata al Lechaya in la Menachem Mechol Ohaveha Kol Re'eha Badu Ba Hayu La Oivim.
So bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. So vivid, right? That cheek imagery. There is none to comfort her of all her friends. All her allies have betrayed her. They have become her enemies.
Galta Yehuda Meoni Umerov Avodahi Yashva Begoyim Lo Matzah Manoach Kol Rodfeha Hasiguha Ben Hamatzarim.
Nitzarim, yeah.
Mitzarim.
Judah has gone into exile because of misery and harsh oppression. When she settled among the nations, she found no rest. So the word here, lo matzah manoach, all which is related to the word for comfort. So rest and comfort, menachem. Found no rest. All her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places, right? So this is a woman who is lonely, who is isolated, who has no comfort, who has no rest, who is trapped, right? Her enemies, her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places. Okay, go on, Hannah.
Darchei Tzion Avelot Mi Bli Ba'e Me'od Moed Kol She'areha Shomei Min Kohaneha Ne'anachim Betuloteha. Betuloteha. It's tiny. It's on my phone. Betuloteha Nugot Vehi Marla.
Okay, so Zion's roads are in mourning, empty of festival pilgrimages. All her gates are deserted. Her priests sigh or really groan. Her maidens are unhappy. She is utterly disconsolate.
Yes, utterly bitter. Hayu tzareha lerosh oiveha shalo ki Adonai hoga al rov Hasha'eha olaleha halchu shavi lefnei tsar.
Her enemies are now the masters. Her foes are at ease because the Lord has afflicted her for her many transgressions. Her infants have gone into captivity before the enemy.
V'yitzei min bat Zion kol hadara hayu tzareha ayalim lo matzu mir'eh v'yelchu below koach lifnei rodef.
Gone from fair Zion are all that were her glory. Her leaders were like stags that found no pasture. They could only walk feebly before the pursuer. Okay, one more verse.
Okay. Zachra Yerushalayim Yemei Anya Umarudeha Kol Machamudeha Asher Hayu Mimei Kedem Bin Fol Ama Biyad Sar Ve'en Ozar La Reuha Tsarim Sachaku Al Mishpateha.
All the precious things she had in the days of old Jerusalem recalled. In her days of woe and sorrow, when her people fell by enemy hands with none to help her, when enemies looked on and gloated over her downfall. So what we have here, right, is, and the Midrash brings these two moments together. We go from this existential question of where are you, to this cry of grief and degradation and isolation and no comfort, and just like a wail, just a wail. And again, some have interpreted the Echa as sort of confronting God, like, how could you, God? How could you do this to us? Okay, so those are the twin themes, the initial twin themes. I'm going to stop my share and take questions and comments. Okay, I see Joe St. George. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, welcome.
Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. I have a question.
Yeah.
In the interpretation of the voice of God, and you said like walking, is it your interpretation that God manifests himself as a physical being? Because that's something that I have as a child always just understood that, or at least my understanding of God is God can do whatever he wants to. And if he wants to manifest himself, then my image or looking like him, I have eyes, nose, hands, mouth. He has feet. I have feet. So I look like him. And that then gives me identity because I look like God. And while I'm not perfect like God, I'm not a creator, but I certainly have all these senses, because if I don't have eyes, if I don't have ears, if I can't touch, I can't experience creation. So what is it to be a being without senses? And so that's why I've always understood it. And so I was wondering what your understanding is, because I like the thought of looking like God.
Very interesting, Joe, what you're saying. So, there are so many well, there are two things. One is, it's a very strong idea in Judaism that we are created in the image of God, right? And there are some strands of interpretation that take that very literally, that our bodies reflect God's body. So that's a kind of a mystical strand of interpretation. That's number one. Number two, the character of God in the Torah is described in ways that are, unavoidably embodied, right? The mouth, the nose that flares, the hand. And I do think that there's something to me about the lack of abstraction of a God in the Torah that helps us connect in some way. I mean, some of us may believe that God can manifest God's self physically, some may not, but there's something about the character that is vividly embodied. That's what I would say. But thank you for that intriguing question. Okay, did I see other hands? If not, I'm like shocked. Usually we have a huge lineup. No. Okay, so we're going to go back to the source sheet. And I guess I will say one thing. I was studying this morning with my chavruta, Rabbi Sharon Konanisfeld, who I think is here. We're talking about these twin themes of grief and accountability, and relating it to this moment of, thinking about climate change. Like it feels like we need those twin poles. If we don't sort of, if we're not accountable, then we're not going to really get very far. And if we don't express grief and regret at what we have sort of brought, the place we have brought ourselves in the earth, then it's hard to really get the reality of where we are. Right? Those twin poles seem really important. And Lamentations, it's interesting. Someone asked me recently, like, do you think Lamentations is productive? Like, it's such a raw expression of grief. Is it productive? Does it get its message across? And I was thinking that maybe there's something like that, maybe there's a voice of grief for its own sake. Like in our society, I feel like there's so much pressure to be happy, happy, happy all the time. And I don't know if you ever experience this, but you look at Facebook and everyone's happy and on vacation, and they're I'm so proud of this, or I'm so proud of that. And where's and not that all of Facebook is like this, but where's the grief? Like, grief is an essential part of the human journey. Where's the grief? And here we have a whole day to express that grief. And it is grief, not so much for our individual sins, but for what we have wrought as a nation. What's our complicity in the calamity? It's a funny alliteration. Okay, now there are hands, of course. All right, I only call on people once, so I'm sorry about that, but I want to hear as many voices as possible, and I'm going to call on Lauren and Jeremy, Margot, Roberta, and Hannah.
Well, I'm so Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Diane. I'm so glad that you said that about grief, because I feel that our society pathologizes grief, and we therefore medicate our grief, as opposed to, say, coming together tomorrow to share our grief collectively. And maybe we're mourning the two temples, or maybe we're mourning the polarized state of our country. There are many, many, many things that we mourn for. So I say yes to accountability, but also to action these days. How can we, that to me would be my poll there. Like, yes, accountability, but to go even further. Maybe tomorrow our grief will give us power to speak out against all the injustices and give us power to find our voices.
Interesting what you're saying. You're making a connection that our griefs can somehow give us power. Can you say one more sentence about how that works?
Well, just as you said, Rabbi Diane, it's a moment collectively where we pause to see where we are, to do some introspection, to examine where we are. And sometimes we need to take that pause in order to figure out how we move forward.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to, God, I forget my lineup. I think Margot, this is the lineup on my screen. Margot.
Shabbat Shalom. When I studied Lamentations, I had to blog and make it personal. And I found some healing that way. And I remember being in synagogue the end of that week, and just when Bat Yerushalayim, the daughter, it's so feminine, just crying, just tears coming down my face, and that way lies healing. One of my favorite, I love animated movies. One of my favorite is Inside Out, where Riley is relocated because her dad got a new job, and she's miserable, but she won't admit it. And this is shown in her head when she puts sadness in a little box and says, "You stay there, joy, I'm taking over." And she loses who she is, and until she honors sadness, she cannot find herself. She feels nothing. She runs away, and so there's a personal, and the healing of a person is essential before we can go and to do tikkun olam. So I found tikkun personally through honoring my own sadness through the study Vecha. And I think we need to honor that before we can heal what's wrong with our planet.
Thank you, Margot. That's beautiful. And that's a beautiful expansion on what Lauren said. So thank you so much. Okay. I think oh my God, what is our lineup? I think we go from Roberta, I think it said Hannah, Alana, Keith. and then Kathy Lynn. Someone help me remember the lineup, please.
Okay, should I go? Yeah.
Yeah, Roberta.
Something that really standing out, speaking to me really in this reading is Mitzrayim. And for me, it's the first maybe big yes I've had to your question. Should we be reading this? Should we be? Because it's so clear in the voices of our prophets that Mitzrayim is not a physical place, that we're not talking about a physical exile. We're not talking about rebuilding a physical temple, that Mitzrayim is this narrow place where we can't access love, and that our liberation will come when in whatever form we come, whatever earthling form we're in, right? That accessing love, as you're saying, toward planet Earth, toward people we think of as enemies, that it's a spiritual journey that we're on. And I think reading it that way could make a great contribution to our people.
Okay, so Mitzrayim as that narrow, constricted place, but you're also suggesting that we read Lamentations that way.
Yeah, well, that's how I'm looking at it right there. I'm looking at 1:1:1:3, is it? Where it's Judah has gone into exile. Of all her friends, the widow, the princess, they're all in Mitzrayim. So it's spiritual.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, Hannah, Alana, and then Keith and Kathy Lynn.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Yes, Lamentations is a very difficult text and very sad and emotional. And it brings out a lot of the bitterness and speaks a lot about Yerushalayim as being sad and bitter and all the things that have happened to her. But what struck me when you were describing it, Rabbi Diane, is you said all the things that she has wrought. And I looked up the word wrought because that word struck me. And wrought means something that you have made or you have created or you have formed or designed. And so that implies an ownership, a creation of these events that happened to Israel, to Yerushalayim, that she had a lot to do with it, that she wrought, that she made and formed and fashioned these calamities that happened to her, that happened to us.
Yeah. So Hannah, you're doing so many interesting things here. One is you're doing midrash on my word as opposed to the text word.
Right.
So that's very cool. The way the tradition, the way the rabbis saw the 9th of Av and saw the destruction of the first and second temple is that, it did come as a result of Israel's sins. Now, that is, of course, a very complicated position. When do you assign disaster to human agency and human action, right? That's very, very tricky because, that gets into blaming people for something they had no control over, perhaps. Or again, like it takes me right, I can't not think about climate change because we have a huge hand in that, a huge hand, right? That's like a vivid example of collective transgression, collective mistreatment of the earth and the natural consequences that come from that mistreatment. So I think we have to be really, really careful when we use that word rot. But I love that you lifted it up. Thank you. Okay, Alana.
So my comment, I feel, comes from what everybody has just said, but in particular, I'm thinking about Lauren's comment about grief, responsibility, and action. And I just love the way, Rabbi Diane, that you've brought in the initial exile from Eden with the destruction of the temple. And so I'm thinking about how maybe this is like a more appropriate and useful reading of that story for this moment, that instead of blaming Eve and blaming the snake, that perhaps what initiated, or what also initiated the exile, was that moment where Adam doesn't take responsibility. And that is our ongoing tikkun, is
And
to
not
learn.
taking responsibility is a way of disconnecting yourself from yourself.
Right.
You're not owning your
Yes.
own actions.
Right, exactly.
Right. So there's a
Yes.
split right there. And that's
Right.
a kind of exile, as Roberta was saying, if we're going to talk in symbolic terms, that's a kind of exile right there.
Right. And that our tikkun is to learn how to do that.
Right. So we're in exile from, from the truth of who we are.
Yes, and the consequences of our actions, and being able to stand up before God,
Yeah.
before the eternal, and say, I chose to do this.
Yeah.
These are my actions.
Thank you. All right. So now we go from Keith to Kathy Lynn to Darius, and then I'm going to call on my friend Elchabrita to read a poem. And I'm really sorry, Joe, but I don't call on people twice. Not in this session. There's not enough time. Okay, Barbara.
Oh, hi, it's Barbara. It's his iPad this morning. Good morning, everybody. Wow. So two things came to me, and in relation to all the wonderful things that everybody has been saying. When you talked about the double blame, in that sentence, and I think about how, today when we're talking about climate change, we're as a collective country or world, we lay blame, this country, that country, without us really being able to kind of get it in hand. But secondly, this idea of grief and being in grief, I think we have to have grief and blaming and anger and all of the destructive actions that we've been having, around climate change, B, around our, the racism in our country. All the things that we do is, to me, connected to large collective grief, and we can't express grief, so we get angry or we get violent. And if we don't have, and we're having this kind of big explosion, and it's the only way to get to, I think, unfortunately, solving, going in and then finally solving, coming out of Mitzrayim, this narrow place, into solving, the climate crisis, because we have to have it so in our face. We're finally working with Black Lives Matter. We're finally, as a country, collectively doing some things, because we had this big explosion. And it's the same thing. Unfortunately, the destruction around the planet is really going to be a hard thing for us to face, especially as we blame everybody else. So that's it.
You said so much, but
I did. Sorry.
Is how grief kind of is pervasive throughout all these extremely painful and intractable issues. Okay, so I'm going to take two more comments, and then we're going to go poem and a couple of other texts. Okay, Kathy Lynn and Darius. Kathy Lynn.
Hi. Okay. So your question initially that I heard was, where's the grief on Facebook? And my question was, where's the truth? Where's the whole truth?
Yeah.
We have some truth, and how to uncover that truth, I guess, how to uncover who we really are, the truth of who we really are. When we're, most families have, you're raised in a family And some families, you can't actually see the truth, because if you do, you won't maybe survive. So we learn very early to shut down, in my opinion, certain areas. And then it's like, that's shutting down who we are. And then we're avoiding all that. We can't see the truth. We've got these blocks in our thinking and in our being because of this. And so then we can easily not make the connection with, like, we're doing bad things to the planet, or, there's something wrong here. And we just kind of we literally don't see it. And so yeah.
Now, I was just going to say a couple of things in response. Like, even without the family that's suppressing the truth is hard. Like Adam, the first person in this world, is already blaming, right? And I remember, like, when my kids were young, like, they start to blame so early. Like, it's this deflection of responsibility is amazing. And I think the truth is brutal. I think we have limited capacity to hold it. Okay, I'm going to go forward to Darius and Nehemiah. I'm going to hope to get you later, but I'm sticking to my plan. Darius, I'm sorry, I got to move on. Darius, I'm sorry, Kathy Lynn.
Okay, just a very a comment on human responsibility and climate change. Several years ago on the night of Slichot, I heard a very interesting discussion of climate change by Joel Novi, the director of Interfaith Power and Light in Washington, D.C. And the text was the second paragraph of the Shema, which basically says, if you're good, you'll get rain. So if you're good, you'll get a good climate. If you're bad, you get a bad climate. And she said that one of the things that was really problematic to her about the text is that those who are the most responsible for climate change, those who consume the most fossil fuels, suffer the least. In part, precisely because of their ability to consume fossil fuels and move elsewhere, but also because, for the most part, those of us who consume a lot of fossil fuels don't live on the islands that will be inundated, and don't live on Bangladesh that suffers those horrible monsoons every year, etc. So that those who act, it's not actually something that all of us bring upon ourselves together. It's something that some of us bring upon others of us.
So Darius, that's a great corrective. And I would say, I think it's mostly true, because I mean, the people in Northern California who are suffering from the wildfire, it was a mixture of rich and poor, right? It depends, right? We all suffer from COVID to some degree, but the poor so much more. But you're right, climate injustice, the people who are, and I think what you're saying is so tragic, the people who are mostly responsible for the destruction are the ones who suffer the least, because they have the most mobility and they live in places that are protected, right? So ouch and yes, that's part of the truth. I think that's hard for us to bear. Okay, I'm sticking to the plan, everybody. And I can't believe this conversation, because I have like about 4 or 5 texts on my page, and it's already 9:45. So, okay. Rabbi Sharon Cohen Anisfeld, if you could read the poem, and then I'm calling on Nehemiah and Asher Chaim, and I invite you all to look at the very interesting source sheet when you can. Oh, Sharon, did you want to drop it in the text? Yeah, let me ask you. Let's see if we can unmute you. We got, okay. Did you want to, if you want to drop it in the text, we can open the text. We can open the chat, I mean. You're not unmuted. I don't know why.
There. Thanks.
Sorry, yeah, I don't know what happened.
It wasn't letting me unmute.
Yeah. Kelly, can you open the chat for a minute? Or maybe just till the end of the session.
Sure. So why don't is it okay if I read it and then I'll drop it in the chat?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I was just, first of all, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you as always. And just as people were commenting earlier, beautiful comments about sadness and the place of sadness, the importance of sadness. I was It called to mind this poem by a former student and friend of mine, Danny Cohen, who lives in Israel and works at the sort of at the intersection of therapy and contemplative practice. So this is a poem he sent maybe a year ago called Sadness. Today, or in these minutes anyway, I'm feeling sad. I want to say that out loud so it has a space in the world. Please don't try and fix it. It's not broken. Please don't try and make it better. It's not lacking. Sad, this flavor of being human right now. Are you uncomfortable with this kind of humanness? Please do not rush to comfort or console. Sadness is not on fire. There's no need for rushing. Let the pace of love take its cues from the beloved. Please learn how to just be with me. Tears, please do not wipe them away. Do not rush for tissues. We will not melt. Life is not meant to be dry. If there is kindness or compassion in your heart, if trust lives in you, let them guide you now when you are unnerved by my sadness. I know you are used to gifts in sparkling wrapping paper, and this one looks different. Yet as this sadness is allowed, know it brings back the breath of this life. Breathing again, this dear sadness moistens this stiff body. You must step into the waters before the sea parts and the way clears. Insisting on staying on dry land will keep you safe from the miracle. Courage rewards those who are willing to feel tenderly together. Welcomed into the arms of loving presence, sadness, this sadness in my being, can finally come home. So I'll put it in the chat, but Diane, I didn't even realize until I was reading it how connected it is to your beautiful drash from last night also, and the connection between sadness and tears and breath.
Yeah, it's so powerful, Sharon, and it feels like it brings together all the themes of this conversation, like the feeling, the grief, how pervasive the denial of grief is in our society and how hard it is to sit with it. And I forget exactly the line at the end, but the feeling grief and the ability to come home out of exile. Right, that's really, really powerful. Thank you so much. Okay, everybody, I think I'm feeling grief because I think I have to stop at 9:50 and we're a minute away, which is kind of a little bit heartbreaking to me. Michaeli, is that correct? I think
yeah, if we could wrap up our concluding thoughts for the next moment or so, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
All right, I really wish I could call on people, and it's my responsibility to close this session. So I'm so sorry. And for me, the lasting message of this session is just like, hold the grief. And we have a day, we have Tisha B'Av to hold the grief and to hold the truth and to hold the complexity of the truth that it's so hard to hold and to see and to be with. And I don't know about you all, but I can't always be with that. Like, I just find it impossible. Sometimes I just have to completely shut down and park myself in front of the television for a couple of hours just because I don't have that capacity. So I bless us all to have the capacity for grief and joy and celebration and despair and contemplation, and for everything in between. May our containers be strong and permeable. Shabbat Shalom.